What's up guys, my name is Ace, and it's time for part 2 of my final review for Black Ops 4. If you guys missed it, part 1 was all of the things that I feel Black Ops 4 did right, because I do think they did quite a few things right, and at its core, I did enjoy the game this year. However, this is part 2, and this is where we're going to be talking about all of the things that I feel they did wrong with Black Ops 4. Just like with the first episode, keep in mind these are my opinions based on my experiences and my preferences. Feel free to disagree, and if you do, just let me know in the comment section down below. But hopping right into it, let's cover one of the biggest things that Black Ops 4 did wrong. This is how they handled their post-launch weapons, especially after the first several months of the game being released. Now, at the beginning of the game's lifecycle, I actually didn't mind the system that they had in place for earning weapons. It wasn't my favorite system that Call of Duty's ever had, but at least there was a reasonable method to earn every single gun directly through playtime alone. You didn't have to spend any money to get those post-launch weapons directly. Then the supply drops started coming around, and they started giving us ultra weapon bribes rather than direct access to the weapons. And the key here is we weren't getting enough of those ultra weapon bribes to earn every one of the guns that they added to the game. So now suddenly you do have to rely on your luck out of reserves and supply drops in order to get those weapons, and that is unacceptable in a full price AAA shooter, in my opinion. It was at that point where my hype for the game was immediately killed. Like, yeah, I still continued to play the game a little bit here or there, but I wasn't excited about playing the game. I was more so just annoyed that no matter how much I played, there was a good chance that I wasn't going to get all of the weapons that I wanted, and still to this day, I have about 20 days of playtime total in Black Ops 4, and I'm missing, I think, 5 or 6 of the post-launch guns. And that's just ridiculous to me. So when they added those guns into supply drops like that, that marks the exact point where this game really went downhill for me, and that's the point where the hype started dying. Additionally, with the post-launch weapons, another thing I really don't like that they did is for many of them, especially lately, they've been making them extremely powerful when they first dropped them to encourage people to spend money on supply drops to get them, and then they've been nerfing them. We saw this with the Daemon, the crossbow, the ballistic knife, and the stingray. And we're also kind of seeing this with the VMP right now, as far as I can tell. I've only picked the VMP up like a handful of times, but every time I do, it feels very, very powerful, like the best SMG in the game. And I think it's kind of scummy to do this, where they make them super powerful, encourage people to spend money on supply drops to gamble their way to try and get them, and then they nerf them back down to the point where they're balanced and fit with the meta. The next thing that I feel Black Ops 4 did wrong, and my second biggest complaint with this game, is specialists. More specifically, the specialist equipment. Now, looking back to Black Ops 3 and Infinite Warfare, the specialists, well, they were somewhat annoying and you would get some undeserved deaths due to those specialists. I didn't really see them as a massive issue by any means. The reason for this is for many of those specialists, you were only earning their ability or their weapon a couple times a game. So it wasn't like you were constantly hit by all of this specialist nonsense. You were just running into it every once in a while. In Black Ops 4, on the other hand, with the specialist equipment combined with the specialist abilities, it feels like you're just constantly dealing with specialist items throughout the entire match. And that to me was the #1 problem with the gameplay in Black Ops 4. Now, having said this, I understand why they did this, and this is something I touched on a little bit in part 1. The core gameplay in Black Ops 4 without specialists has a very high skill gap, a very high mechanical skill gap especially, and in order to keep the game accessible for casual players, they had to do something to compensate for that skill gap. This is where the specialists come in. So I get why they did it, but I think they took it way too far in the other direction, and it got to the point where I feel like roughly half of my deaths are either directly or indirectly caused by specialist weapons, abilities, or equipment. Now, thankfully, they did add the bare bones mode to Black Ops 4, which restricted the use of specialists, but then they started highlighting a different issue with the game, and this is the time to kill discrepancies between guns with the new time to kill in Black Ops 4. Now, if you guys watch part 1, you'll know that in some ways, I really like the slightly longer time to kill of Black Ops 4 because it leads to actual gunfights where there's some evasion going on, and the person that has sustained accuracy is going to excel with that kind of a system. However, it also led to a lot of problems, and the first one is it made balancing one-shot kill weapons very difficult. Because now all of the regular guns, like the SMGs, assault rifles, LMGs for instance, they are killing slower than we've ever seen in Call of Duty, But a sniper still kills in one shot, and shotguns can still kill in one shot. So now it becomes very difficult to balance those, and I don't think they did a very good job balancing, especially these sniper rifles in Black Ops 4. I found it kind of crazy that with Black Ops 4, regular guns kill slower, but sniper rifles still one-shot kill. And to top this off, they didn't make any adjustments to the aim down sight time of the sniper rifles compared to previous Call of Duty games. The logical thing to do to compensate for the time to kill discrepancy is slow down the aim down sight time a little bit on the sniper rifles. If anything, they actually sped them up, especially with attachments, like the Koshka for instance, with double quick draw. That is one of the fastest aiming down sight sniper rifles we have ever had in Call of Duty that has a one-shot body kill potential. And this is a problem. If you ended up in a lobby against a competent quickscoper, good luck in any sort of face-to-face situation. The gunfight is entirely in their hands. Additionally, I think they missed a big opportunity with having this slower time to kill. I feel they also should have rewarded headshots by default with this. This would have made it so if you were accurate and hitting those headshots, then you could kill just as fast as you could kill in previous Call of Duty games, but if you just aimed at the body, then you had this slower time to kill. And at launch, they actually did this with some of the guns in the game, like the ICR for instance. If you were hitting multiple headshots mixed in with body shots, it would reduce the number of shots it takes to kill by 1 with no attachments necessary. However, they ended up falling back on this, and now headshots, unless you're using the high caliber attachment, are useless on pretty much every gun in pretty much every situation. So I do think that was a bit of a missed opportunity, and I was very disappointed to see them go back on that. Additionally, with time to kill, I just wanted to mention that I didn't really like the fact that dealing with multiple enemies was so much harder. Now, yes, it's logical, it makes sense, of course it should be harder dealing with 2 enemies rather than 1, but in previous Call of Duty games, if you were positioning yourself well and you were taking multiple enemies off guard, you could take out 3 or 4 of them like it was nothing. Whereas in Black Ops 4, that's not usually going to happen if you're running into 3 or 4 enemies at the same time, even if you're coming up behind them and taking them off guard. Now, this isn't necessarily flawed game design by any means, I just feel it didn't fit with the Call of Duty franchise and it took some of that magic away that we're used to with Call of Duty. Moving on to the next thing that I feel Black Ops 4 did wrong, this one's relatively minor but still kind of annoying. This is the Fog of War system. I really think the Fog of War was just designed to be a marketing gimmick at launch, and it was a complete flop. It destroyed the effectiveness of the Ghost perk in Black Ops 4, and it just seemed like it added absolutely nothing to the game. It only took away from the gameplay experience, and it was completely bugged out as well. There are still several situations where enemy players will pop up in your Fog of War through walls. So I feel like the Fog of War just caused a lot of problems and didn't really add anything at all to the experience. Next up on my list, the Black Ops Pass. In my opinion, it was a mistake to have a Black Ops Pass or a Season Pass type of system in the first place. The industry has already moved on. Call of Duty has shifted most of their focus towards post-launch microtransactions, and therefore they should have been focusing on player retention and providing free content that will keep players hooked so they'll buy more microtransactions. So it felt really out of touch when they announced the Black Ops Pass, and most people were not expecting that. To top this all off, the Black Ops Pass was the same price or maybe even a little bit more expensive if I remember correctly, yet we only got 12 maps instead of 16 maps that we would normally get with Season Passes in Call of Duty. To make matters worse, of those 12 maps, 3 of them were remakes from previous Call of Duty games. This means that we only got 9 new maps with the Black Ops Pass. And the final thing to mention with this, that does come down to personal preference to an extent, the majority of these Black Ops Pass maps, in my opinion, have no place in this particular game. With Black Ops 4 being 5v5 and not having a ground war mode, many of the Black Ops Pass maps were just way too big and way too open, and they played far too slow. There was only a small handful of the maps from the Black Ops Pass that I enjoyed, and all of the worst maps in the game, in my opinion, were Black Ops Pass maps. If I had the ability to disable DLC like we had in Modern Warfare 3, I would check that option off, and it really makes me feel like the Black Ops Pass was a waste of money. Moving on to the next thing that Black Ops 4 did wrong, this is Zero. The Specialist Zero, well, I do like her EMP, and I think that was a good addition to the game because it was great for countering a lot of the other specialists. The big problem I have with Zero is her ability to literally steal lethal streaks and use those against the person that actually earned that streak. That is completely backwards, and I absolutely hated it. All the Zero player has to do is exist on the map for a certain period of time, and then they can steal a streak that somebody worked hard to earn, and that streak will be used against the player that earned it. You shouldn't be punished for earning a streak. At most, Zero should have been able to disable or destroy lethal streaks with her ice pick and hack non-lethal streaks like UAVs and counter UAVs. She should never have had the ability to turn lethal streaks against the person that actually earned that streak. This made it so the drone squad and attack chopper are no longer viable options in my opinion, because it's simply too risky. If you earn one of those, there is a chance the enemy can steal it and use it against you, which is unacceptable in my opinion. Moving on to the next thing on my list, this is the feeling of a general lack of content for multiplayer, especially early on in the game's lifecycle. The game launched with only 10 original maps. There were some remakes mixed in there as well, but as far as original content goes, there were only 10 at launch, and then like I said, we only got 9 original maps added with the Black Ops Pass. Then we also had Grind added as well for free, which was really nice. But I did get the feeling with maps that there wasn't really enough original content there. On top of that, weapons. There weren't very many weapons at launch, and then also post-launch, the weapons came a lot slower than we were used to with previous years like Infinite Warfare and World War II. We had a lot of post-launch content in both of those games, and Black Ops 4 just didn't keep up with the pace of adding those weapons until they brought the supply drops in. Then they started adding 3 weapons at a time. But for the first portion of the game's life cycle, I blasted through Dark Matter like it was nothing because there weren't very many weapons at launch, and then it was a very slow trickle of content when it came to those guns being added. Going off of that, I also got the impression that there wasn't enough to grind for in Black Ops 4. Like I said, I blasted through Dark Matter really easily. There was no sort of hero armor. I was really hoping they'd have something like that. So you were actually encouraged to try out all the different specialists and complete challenges with those specialists. That didn't exist within this game. And then contracts, they came really late in the game's life cycle. I feel contracts should have been in there from the beginning, or at least much earlier than when they were actually added. Now yes, we did have the seasons with the contraband streams to grind through, but I found that didn't really scratch my grinding itch because you're not actually really working towards something, you're not completing challenges, you're just putting the time in and existing in the game for a period of time, which I don't find to be very rewarding, and it doesn't really keep me around. So I really wish we would have had more to work towards that would have kept me around for longer. Moving on to the next thing that I feel Black Ops 4 did wrong, and this is starting to get into some of the specifics. First up, the Ghost perk. I feel like the Ghost perk was completely useless in this game. And don't get me wrong, I don't really like it when Ghost is always on. I don't like Ghost being too powerful because that can get kind of annoying, especially when you don't have access to a VSAT or a hater style streak, which is another thing that I feel they did wrong in this game. But with the Ghost perk in Black Ops 4, they made it so it would only activate if you were sprinting. And I don't feel like that was lenient enough. I feel like it should have been more along the lines of what we saw in Black Ops 3, where if you were at least still walking at full speed, you would stay off the radar with Ghost, and it would take a couple seconds after you stop moving to deactivate. So it would allow you to stop and catch your breath for a second, to maybe stop and get a reload, or to take a second to try and pre-aim around a corner. In Black Ops 4, it wasn't forgiving at all. To top that all off, Fog of War, like I mentioned, even with the Ghost perk, if you ended up in the enemy's Fog of War, even if you ran up behind them and knifed them in the back, you would now show up on the minimap for all of the enemies to see. And I really feel like they completely killed the stealth playstyle in Black Ops 4, which just limits variety in playstyles, and I don't think that was a good thing. As for another thing about the class setups that I really didn't like, and I would have loved to see a small change that I feel would improve the game quite a bit, this is the fact that the special issue equipment doesn't cost a point to put on your class, which made all of the other pieces of equipment basically useless. Like almost nobody uses that because why would you spend a point on that when you can get a really powerful special issue equipment for free? A small tweak I really would have liked to see is make it so the gear was your free item on your class, so everybody could pick one piece of gear, which they pretty much do all the time anyways, and then you would make it so any piece of equipment, whether that's special issue or a frag grenade, that will cost a point on your class. That may have reduced some of the specialist spam in the game, and it would have made some of the other pieces of equipment like combat axes, frag grenades, and Molotovs viable to use. Now I know that's a bit on the nitpicky side, but I do feel like that would have improved the gameplay experience at least a little bit. Now getting outside of the gameplay related stuff, I really didn't like the user interface in Black Ops 4. It was poorly optimized, especially now after all of the updates and post-launch things that have been added. The menus are so slow to load. It takes sometimes like 15 to 20 seconds just to get from one menu to a different menu. And then there's all the times when it's just non-responsive. It just freezes up on you and you can't do anything. That's really frustrating. I don't like the cursor system as well on console. It's great for PCs, but when you have a controller, linear menus work so much better than the cursor system, in my opinion. And even though the menus are beautiful, they look great in Black Ops 4, I would much rather have a functional system that doesn't look quite as nice. Also, when we're talking about the menus, something that I really missed in Black Ops 4 was a detailed in-game combat record, where you could actually look at specifics like your performance with individual weapons. Now, we did have a pretty basic combat record, so you saw your basic stats like your kill-death ratio, win-loss ratio, all that kind of stuff, but you didn't have all of those details. You could download the Call of Duty Companion app on a mobile device and check all of your detailed stats through that. But I personally just think that's very strange. I would rather have that all displayed in the game because generally when I want to look at that stuff, I'm in the game. I don't want to pull my phone out. I just want to see it while I'm in game. So that's another thing that's relatively minor, but it would have been nice if Black Ops 4 actually included those detailed stats in the game itself. Now, one last thing I almost forgot to mention, body armor. Now, admittedly, body armor isn't nearly as annoying as I initially thought it might be when we first heard that there would be body armor in the game. Having said that though, I fundamentally disagree with having a body armor style system in Call of Duty. It just creates too many inconsistencies in time to kill and inconsistencies in gunfights. If it was an ability or something that you could maybe earn a couple times a match, yeah, I could be okay with that. The big problem for me is it was an item on your class that you would get every single time you spawned into the match. Was it the most powerful piece of gear? No, not in my opinion. However, it still created those inconsistencies, and I just can't agree with a body armor style system in Call of Duty. But with that, that pretty much wraps it up for everything I've got written down on my list here for the things that I feel Black Ops 4 did wrong. I may be missing a few points here or there, but at least I think I've got all of the primary ones covered. Like I said in part 1, I didn't hate Black Ops 4, but at the same time, I really do feel like they did a lot of things wrong with the game. If I had to sum all of this up, I would say Black Ops 4 is a game that had a ton of potential that was unfortunately just wasted, at least within the context of multiplayer. I said it in part 1, I think they did a really good job with Blackout overall. Also, zombies, from an outsider's perspective, I think they did a good job with that as well. But multiplayer, in my opinion, was just completely wasted potential. If they would have handled just a few things completely differently, like the microtransaction system and the way that they balanced and handled specialists, I really do feel like this could have been a great multiplayer Call of Duty game. But unfortunately, it just wasn't, in my opinion. Of course, this is where I want to ask you guys, what do you think Treyarch did wrong with Black Ops 4 this year? This is where I want you guys to just let it all loose, don't hold back. What do you not like about this game? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Yeah.